Hello and welcome to Where Parents Talk TV. My name is Lianne Castelino, and our guest today is an author, a journalist, an award-winning writer, and a TED speaker. He's also the architect of the slow movement. We're delighted to welcome Carl Honoré. Hi, Carl.
Hi, good to be with you.
In 9 years, so 2011 is when we last spoke, and the whole idea of the slow movement was still in its infancy. First of all, for our audience, can you tell us a bit about what the slow movement is about?
Sure. I'll start by telling you what it's not about. It's not about doing everything very slowly. That would be absurd, right? I'm not an extremist or a fundamentalist of slowness. Faster is often better. We all know that. The slow movement with a capital S is about doing things at the right speed, knowing that sometimes you want to be fast, sometimes you want to slow things down. It's like sometimes turbo, sometimes tortoise mode, right? It's a frame of mind, really. It's a state of being. It's kind of being present in the moment, doing one thing at a time. Ultimately, it's about doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible. Really simple idea, but immensely powerful.
So in your mind, how has the pace of the slow movement gone for you since it's been introduced?
Well, I mean, this is one of the joyous ironies of the last few years is that slow movement has grown really fast. I mean, when I first floated the idea, I felt like a voice in the wilderness, and it felt so countercultural and so out of step with what everything else was happening in the society and culture. But now I think that the whole very idea of slow, that there's such a thing as good slow, right, has very much carved out a place in the center of the cultural conversation. So there are, in every field of human endeavor, you'll find people bringing the lens of slow and saying, how can I do this thing better by slowing down a bit? So most people will have heard of slow food, but of course now there's everything from slow education to slow sex, slow leadership, slow art, slow fashion, slow travel, slow medicine, you name it, right? That if you slow down and do things mindfully at the right speed, you're going to do them better and enjoy them more. And I've just seen it grow in leaps and bounds, and it's been pretty amazing.
So when you talk about slow, Carl, as it relates to parenting, that was really sort of the thrust of your message and certainly your book In Praise of Slow, as well as your book Under Pressure. How has the pandemic had an impact on that slow movement?
Well, it's a complex thing because the pandemic it's like a board game, and it's just thrown all the pieces up in the air, right? So in some ways it's been wonderful. In other ways, I think it's been pretty hideous. Let's look at the upsides. I think a lot of families now through the lockdowns and just the fact that there are fewer things you can do outside the home have found themselves just by default spending more time together, right? And not striving and rushing from one activity to the next activity to the next resume building thing they can do, and just being, less doing and more being together. And this is something you hear from parents through social media or social circles or in the press, is that it's been a bit of a revelation to a lot of parents how glorious it is just to kind of hang out with your kids and get to know them more and just do things that don't have to appear on a university application form, just cooking together or doing a craft or going for a walk. So I think a lot of parents have kind of reconnected with that very simple, slow form of being a family together. And that's something I hope, and I kind of expect it will carry forward. You hear most parents saying, I don't want to go back to that rat race, hamster wheel approach to raising children that I was stuck in before. I want to keep some of this good slow that we've experienced in the last few months and take it forward.
And it's really interesting you say that, because that really was my next question. Do you, from where you sit and all of sort of the different hats that you wear and the perspectives you have, first of all, as a father yourself of a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, do you see that the legacy of the pandemic may well be the sustained slow movement carrying forward?
I do. I mean, I haven't got a crystal ball and no one knows what is going to happen for sure. But I think we've been in this time of crisis long enough now for it to leave a lasting mark. If it had been 6 weeks, I would have said to you, I'm not sure this really is an inflection point in history. People can forget things and unlearn habits in 6 weeks very easily. 6 months, not so much. I think we've had enough, we've marinated in this new way of being long enough now that I think some of it's going to stick, especially the good stuff. And you see it in the polling and the way people are coming back to the workplace with a different spirit, or not wanting to go back to the office, preferring to work at home to have more control over their time. All that stuff that fits with the slow revolution, the slow creed, people are digging their heels in a little bit now and saying, you know what? No, we're not going to go back to the status quo ante. And I live in London, England, and you can see in the way the city is arranged. You know, we made, like a lot of cities around the world, we created more space for pedestrians and cycle paths and so on. Those things are here to stay. They're not going anywhere, right? So I think, again, it's part of it, just a general tectonic shift that's happening that will carry forward, but it will only carry forward if we insist on that being the case, right? We can't just let it happen, because there is so much inertia and tendency to go back to the way things were. I think we do need to carry on telling our employers, telling our schools, talking to our communities, sitting around the table at home and at the kitchen as a family and saying, what did we like about this last 6 months? And how can we make sure we keep some of that good stuff as we move forward? So I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure we keep on keeping on, right? We keep at it.
It's so interesting. Your first book, In Praise of Slow, came out in 2004. So it's been 16 years that you have been on this movement. First of all, what was the impetus for it way back when? And have you been satisfied with its growth over time and its evolution?
Well, the spark for me to write the book in the first place actually was a parenting moment. And back in those days, before I wrote In Praise of Slow, I was just a card-carrying road runner. So every moment of my day was a race against the clock. I just had one speed, and that speed was turbo, right? So when I started reading bedtime stories to my son, you know, I became an expert in what I call the multiple page turn technique, right? You know, I was so fast. My version of Snow White had 3 dwarfs. And when I caught myself flirting with buying a book I heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story, you know, Snow White in 60 Seconds, you know, I thought, I need to get that book from Amazon, drone delivery. And then I just caught myself and thought, no, this is just so far off what I want to be. And that was the reset moment. And I began then to reconnect with my inner tortoise. And 16 years later, you know, from a personal point of view, it's been a total transformation. I still have a, you know, exciting life. I do things that I think are important and that bring me pleasure and joy and satisfaction, but I don't feel rushed anymore, right? Which is so different from before, when I felt rushed all the time, right? Now if I have to go fast, you know, I go as fast as needs to be done and as fast as anyone around me, but I also have those other gears of slowing down. And it changed the whole family dynamic as well. You know, I stopped speed reading Snow White for a start, but the whole family, we moved towards a kind of slow way of being. You know, we thought hard about how many extracurriculars to have. Our children, both our children, grew up with a very slow way of using technology. You know, they got their smartphones, you know, maybe a bit later than their peers, but they also used them in a way where they were switching them off, and they didn't sort of we never had addiction problem. I don't think I ever had a moment I can think of really of trying, you know, telling off my children for spending too much time on screens, because they just grew up in a household where we talked constantly about, yeah, sure, Snapchat's fun, Xbox, FIFA, great, but not 5 hours in a row, right? Mm-hmm. And we just got in there early, planted those seeds, and and I see my children now, who are now, you know, 21 and 18 and off at university and stuff, you know, they've got a really good grip on their use of time, their use of technology, and they just seem to have carried forward in their own lives with a lot of this slow legacy. So, yeah, I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back there as I move into the empty nester chapter of my life.
Well, and I hope you enjoy that as you approach it. But, you know, I'm wondering, it sounds like it really was a very conscious decision on your part. It was very proactive on yours and your wife's part. Fast forwarding 16 years, so much has happened with respect in particular to technology. The frantic pace that you described way back then does seem like a tortoise when you look at what's going on now in a lot of families and a lot of households. And, you know, in many respects, not a fault of these people, these parents trying to do the best for their children. So what advice can you provide to them?
Well, certainly, I never want to stand on a soapbox and point the finger. I mean, I think every parent out there is doing their very best. And it's hard, right? I mean, if you've been bombarded with the message that, you know, you must be always busy, your child must be rushing, and everyone around you doing the same thing, it's really hard to step off that conveyor belt. How do you do it? Well, I think a starting point is to have just a moment of pause, right? As a family, as a parent first, talk to your partner, you know, have that conversation where you sit down and say, well, what do we want, right? What do we cherish about this moment in our family life? What do we want to look back later on and think we wanted more of that, right? And think about how you then reschedule, your use of time, technology. I mean, all these sort of little, there are many, millions of little hacks you can do. Just with the technology, for instance, you can have a quiet room, one room in the house that, for instance, is permanently free of gadgets, and I find in our house that becomes a place that, without anybody having to say it, turns into a sanctuary, right? A little refuge where people drift to when they need to be off the grid, or when they need to have a conversation with someone else in the family without being distracted or interrupted. I think it's important as well to, just picking up what I was saying earlier about being infected by other people's anxieties and speed and busyness, is to reach out into your community through your school and find other parents who are also looking to dial down the pressure, dial down the busyness, dial down the speed, because they are out there and they are legion, but we're all kind of atomized and cut off. And you find those parents, it becomes easier to take that first step towards slowing down, right? For a start, if you're worried about, you say, well, I can't, deschedule my child because what is who is he or she going to play with when everyone else is scheduled constantly, right? But you could find, you slow down with another family. So you find times where those children of the same age can, play together in a way that's free and unhurried and unstructured and stuff. So, it's hard to sort of shoehorn it all in one way, but there are many, many levers that we can pull about, use of time, use of technology in the home, trying to incorporate another thing. I was trying to incorporate slow tasks, things like cooking together, going for a walk, stuff that, at the time, again, it's not going to feature on a Harvard application, but it's actually going to be the stuff of a family life well lived, right? It's the stuff that develops, children's emotional strength and resilience and the bonding in the family and ideas and and articulate use of language and so on. And all those things will happen when you just kind of back off and just let things happen instead of feeling you've got to rush in and move them towards a particular outcome. We're always being told to lean in, right, as parents. Sometimes you've got to lean in, but sometimes you've got to lean back, right? And just let things happen at their own pace. Let children get bored sometimes, right? Because boredom, if you allow it to happen, is a trampoline towards creativity, using your imagination, all the good stuff that we want our kids to have. So, it's about getting that gear change, right? Sometimes fast, sometimes leaning in, sometimes slowing down and leaning back.
So let me ask you this. We are seeing disturbing, alarming rises in mental wellness issues, mental health issues, especially among children. Do you see a correlation between the speed at which things continue to go on in the world, and particularly in families, and those rising numbers?
I do. And I mean, these things are often hard to get, the science, the data and so on. But I think there's, as a broad brushstroke across the world, certainly if you look at sort of societies like, say, Denmark, which you would consider, where they would generally be living at what you would consider a slower lifestyle, shorter working hours, less commuting, more cycling and walking, all that sort of stuff. They have much higher levels of child satisfaction and happiness and mental health than, say, the Anglosphere, like Canada, US, Britain, and so on, where we tend to be on the faster end of that scale. I think it's pretty clear that and this goes for parents and adults as much as it does for kids, that if you're stuck in fast forward, if you only ever rush, if you don't take time to rest, recharge, reflect, sometimes just do nothing at all, right? Then you're heading for trouble, because not only are you going to burn yourself out physically, but you're going to pay a price mentally and cognitively, right? And I don't think there's any disconnect or any coincidence between the fact that, as you say, the graph for mental illness, mental disorders and problems has just gone up through the roof at a time the society has accelerated, right? Human beings are slow. Computers are fast. Tech is fast. Human beings, we are slow. We need time off the clock. We need time, we need to sleep. Just simple stuff like sleeping enough. Even we seem to have lost the art of sleeping, and kids, often it's sitting in bed looking at a blue screen. It's no surprise that they're not going to be sleeping as well. And then, there's this library of research that shows that when you don't get enough sleep, that has, harms child development and all kinds of things in sort of, social well-being and emotional well-being and physical well-being. So short answer, yes, there's a clear correlation between the great acceleration and the great rise in mental health problems.
Carl, what gives you hope as you look to the future? I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we're in the middle of a global health emergency here, but with respect to the slow movement, maybe the course correcting that the pandemic perhaps has enabled in many families and households, what gives you hope that, what you've been talking about for all these years will resonate even more so?
I think, even before the pandemic hit, I think that there was a seismic shift going on. You could see it and I guess a short answer is what gives me hope is the next generation, because I think this new generation coming through have a very different take on things, right? A different view of the world and how things should fit together and what's right and what's wrong. And they're looking at my generation, generations that have come before and saying, I'm not sure I want that, right? I don't think I want to be, destroying the planet with my lifestyle, working so many hours I never see my children when they're small. Talk to human resource departments around the world, and the new generation coming in are saying, I'm willing to work really hard. I want to do well, but I also want to do good, right? I want to be sure that the company is good for the environment. It's good for the social fabric of my community. It's good for the world. And I think there was before the pandemic a big push on questions of, when you talk about, green policies and so on. Just a rethink was going on, and you were already starting to see changes. You used the phrase course correction. I think that's what the pandemic has done. In some ways, it has accelerated or will accelerate some of those trends, because the idea of going back, it takes a short, sharp shock, right? For people finally to say, what we had before is gone, right? The sell-by date has passed. It's time for something new. And I think that what we had coming before, put together with the pandemic, is going to, when we come out of this, we will accelerate and go deeper, I think, in some of these changes. And a lot of it will be driven by the next generation who really, you see it, you hear it in marketing companies as well, that this generation are less interested in buying stuff, owning things. They're much more interested in experiences, right? In living things. Again, totally slow approach to life, right? It's about experience, being in the moment, doing stuff that, you're forging memories that are going to last a lifetime, rather than buying something that you kind of enjoy for a little while and then throw out. So I do think that there was a tectonic shift was coming before the pandemic. Will give it another boost as we move forward.
Before we let you go, Carl, can you give us a sense of what you're up to these days? You've always got a very full schedule and all kinds of interesting things happening. What are you up to?
Although I've spent years sort of leading the slow movement, my latest book is about aging and attitudes to aging. It's called Bolder. So I'm now doing a lot more work in just because I guess I was taking on the cult of speed before. Now I'm taking on the cult of youth, right? Mm-hmm. And trying to create a new way of thinking about aging, so we can all not only do it better but feel better about doing it. I'm also putting together a slow workbook, which I've been meaning to do for years. It's one of those things that you pull off the shelf in a pandemic when there's not so much else going on. And I'm just putting finishing touches on that and looking forward to launching that out into the world.
Well, we wish you the best. Before I let you go, though, I just have one more question that popped up for me here. Your children, what has been their feedback to you and your wife about this conscious decision that you made as parents to slow that household down all those years ago? And I'm sure they were probably on an island with their friends in that respect, but what's been their feedback now that they're young adults?
I think that they feel that they got a good deal. I think I often will talk about, because we'll talk about what their peers are doing and so on, and they sort of regard people who've got carried on, peers, contemporaries, stuck in fast forward, unable to switch off their phone, trying to do way too many things, just sort of burning themselves out, with a kind of pity is probably the wrong word, but maybe a there but for the grace of God go I sort of sense of that could have been me, but thankfully it's not. So yeah, they're what they do is that I guess a big thing about the whole slow idea is regaining autonomy over your own time, the way you use time, the way you live your life. And that's the one thing I would say about both my children, is that they know their own minds, right? Because they've had the time and the space to get to know themselves, right? To know what works for them. And that's one of the biggest benefits of creating that slow atmosphere in a home, is that your children have the space, the time, the freedom to work out who they are, and rather than what everyone else wants them to be, right? And to forge their own path and to stand on their own 2 feet. And I see that with both my kids, that they're going to be fine, pandemic or no pandemic. They're gonna they're gonna be able to come out the other end.
Well, and what a wonderful thing to be able to say as a parent, right? I mean, that's just exactly what our job is at the end of the day.
Yeah, I had a thought the other day, just one final little thought, if I
Yeah.
could, which is I was listening to a parenting podcast, and there was a lot of parents were sort of talking about wanting to find a great, aspiring to greatness and making the children be good to great, and all this sort of, how can we do parenting to make our children great? And I remember thinking, you know what, that's not the way to think about it. It really, I guess the core of my message for parents and the idea of the slow parenting movement is that not every child is cut out for greatness. They're just not, right? Not every child is cut out for greatness, but every child can find something that is great for them, right? And the way they will do that is by having that slowness, right? To work out where to plant their 2 feet in the world. And that's the greatest gift you can give to a child.
What a powerful message and food for thought. Carl Honoré, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Good, great chatting.